You're listening to Let Me Speak to a Manager with Frank Cava and Ian Mathews.
What a crock of shit.
Yeah, that was hot mic, Sam.
You can't say God on the air.
Don't worry, nobody's listening anyway.
Do it live! I'll write it and we'll do it live!
Mikey!
Ian, you son of a bitch.
This episode is going to be like therapy for you because you work with a star on this podcast and it's probably very challenging for you. So maybe we can work through some of your challenges.
Clearly, I worked through a star with none of the star treatment. The funny thing was, as you were saying that on cue down the hall, I could hear Eddie laughing. He just knows you're full of shit.
He knows I'm a star. So we are talking about star employees, and the folks that we're talking about, all the parallels are in sports, obviously, but these are the folks that drive the lion's share of your results in an office. And they're whether your company is tiny or enormous, there are stars in every team that just tend to deliver more of the results. One of my first experiences just learning about a star on a sports team, Mike Allstott. Do you remember Mike Allstott from the Tampa Bay Buccaneers? Big fullback.
Oh, hell yeah.
Yeah, Hall of Famer, animal, right? So he did that in the NFL, right? Ran over people. You can imagine what it was like. You can imagine what it would be like being on his team at Purdue. 250 pounds. He could run like a halfback. He was an animal, all-American fullback. But I had a few friends that were on Purdue's football team when I was a freshman, and Allstott was a senior. And I would just ask him about practice and what's it like to try to tackle Allstott. And they were like, you're not allowed to hit Allstott in practice. And I was like, what? And they're like, no, he wears a red jersey. And I'm like, this was, 94. And I'm like a quarterback. They're like, no, our quarterbacks don't wear red. We can hit the quarterbacks. You can't hit Allstott. A fullback wasn't allowed to be hit because he was so important to the team. Literally, he was our entire team. He would just run people over. I think we only won 4 or 5 games that whole season, and they were all like games where Allstott ran for 280 yards. But in practice, coach made it clear you're not allowed to hit Allstott, and no one complained because it hurt to hit Allstott. So they didn't want to hit him anyway. But just a great example of like star player getting star treatment because football practice sucks. That would be nice to go through your college career without being able to get hit because you're that good.
What I'm curious of here as the star of this podcast, Ian, I'm going to fact check you and see how many times he ran for 280 yards.
No, 280 yards is probably not accurate, but he did have a few 200 yards games in 94 for sure.
That's incredible. And you went off script on me. I didn't know we were going Allstott. That's incredible.
Yeah, I want to throw you off a little bit, but there's all kinds of stories. Like we were talking about Bo Jackson, in the 30 for 30, Bo talks about how he kind of saw practice as unnecessary. And specifically, he thought all the running in practice was unnecessary. And he got into an argument with his running back coach and pretty much said, I'm not going to sprint hard anymore. And, the coach was like, well, we'll see how that works out in the game. And he went off, like blew up in the game. And Pat Dye after that was like, well, Bo wasn't the kind of athlete you wanted to wear out in practice anyway. So it's kind of like they had these rules, except if you have a guy that comes along every 50 years that's an unreal athlete. And I think you see that in all sports. The Allen Iverson, we talking about practice is pretty famous, where a lot of people were saying Allen didn't want to go to a practice. And, anyone who ever played against Iverson in a game knows that you were getting 100% of him, whether he practiced hard or not. So, I think you can find these examples all over the sports world.
What's interesting to me, and my favorite one, it's from down deeper in the agenda, but I'll just use it now, is when the Cowboys were bad and when the Cowboys got good. I was young. I was in high school and then early in college, right? They won their first Super Bowl when I was in high school and their second one when I was in college. And I remember hearing an interview with Jimmy Johnson, and he was talking about Emmitt Smith. And what was interesting is he goes, there is no way in hell I treated Emmitt Smith the same as I treated undrafted free agent rookie left tackle. So like, I didn't understand management then, but I heard that and I was like, that's pretty interesting. And I come from a world where everyone's treated fairly, my mother's rule. And I thought that really stood out. But as I got into my career, what I started to realize was a couple things. Stars do get treated differently. But what we're going to talk about in this episode is there's repercussions if it's not handled properly. Athletes are hard to compare to business owners or business people because in the world of business, you don't usually know the number 2 or the number 3 or the number 4. They don't become super famous. Like even your rock star CEOs, there's someone behind Elon Musk, not just like him and a bunch of cars. And there's a bunch of people at, Amazon or Apple or other things, but you don't hear about them. You hear about the rock star CEO. But in the world of sports, like someone like Emmitt Smith, I think he retired somewhere between 35 and 40. I don't think he made it to 40. Like Ian and I are a decade older than that at this point. And you can really get your stride in business older. So your body wears out in sports. So some of these examples of getting like not aging well, it tends to be because the body runs out. But that was one of the first examples I ever saw of treating an athlete different or treating someone different because they're a star and someone like just coming out and being like, yep, that's true.
Sports teams are just such obvious parallels in business because a star, and especially you take like basketball. I mean, a star in basketball, if you've got a Michael Jordan, a LeBron James, literally one person can change your entire season, which you've seen with LeBron over and over. He comes to Cleveland, they start winning. He leaves Cleveland, they're the worst team in the league, and they get Kyrie Irving in the draft. He comes back, they win a championship. He leaves, they're the worst team in the NBA. So, when you look at just how much a star drives, and it's the same in business, it's the 80-20 rule. 80% of your production comes from 20% of your inputs. It's the same with people. You typically have people that just drive an extraordinary amount of production for your company. And a reason why these folks get different treatment is, one, they've earned it. And we're going to talk about that a little bit, but they kind of earn a little bit of autonomy, a little bit more input. But they're also the most in demand. When I talk about LeBron James, when he goes into free agency, every NBA team is trying to figure out a way to get him. And there are 10 teams every time that are willing to pay the largest sum of money ever paid to an NBA player. So if your star is going to get bid up in the market, you have to offer them things that maybe another company won't give them, some different things, some different treatment that they won't get. Or if you're trying to recruit a star away from somebody, you have to give them some things that maybe they're not getting from their company. And a famous example of this is Kawhi Leonard was a basketball star for the San Antonio Spurs, and he won a couple of championships with Coach Popovich. Coach Popovich is very much a, old school driver, push you hard, play every game. And Leonard wanted more input into the offense. He wanted more days off during the year so he didn't run his body down. And Pop wasn't having it. And so Toronto said, we'll give you all that. And we'll pay for your own personal trainer that works on your body all year round. We'll spend a huge amount of money just to make sure that your body stays fresh. We'll give you extra days off. We're going to give you input. And they recruited him away from San Antonio, and they were rewarded. They won a championship by doing that. So sometimes being stubborn with your star and not being flexible, the Spurs have kind of sucked ever since he left. And so by being stubborn, you have to understand that there's trade-offs for results. And Popovich might have known exactly what he's doing because he cares long-term about the culture of his organization, what he's trying to do. But there's trade-offs when it comes to stars always.
So you were pulling that up, and I thought when you were talking about that star treatment, I was thinking about something different. So when I was a kid, middle school age, I had a buddy. His name was Nate Denton. Nate Denton's dad played in the NBA. And we all immediately thought Nate Denton's dad was going to be an incredible coach because he played in the NBA. He wasn't. But one of the things,
spoiler alert, he wasn't.
But one of the things that was cool about it was he said to us, he goes, hey, if somebody gets the hot hand, we're going to feed them till they're ice cold. One of the reasons that with 12-year-olds, you don't do that, because then you just shoot, nobody passes, just shoot the crap out of it. So that's what we ended up doing. And I was like, that was a unique methodology when I was 12, 13 years old, that there's a shooter, there's a hot hand. Now he was a pro, and he was accustomed to working with people who were pros and who were good at shooting and better than us as 12-year-olds. But it's a mentality, right? Like, you give the best player the ability to have that latitude. Lots of great examples of that in sports. But what I think is the most relevant thing is, in business, when you have a hot shooter, how do you treat them? But how do you treat the hot shooter so the hot shooter doesn't become a cancer? If the hot shooter turns into a ball hog, even as 12-year-olds, the 12-year-olds lose interest, and they're not going to run up and down the court. And there's no chance in hell you're going to win 1-on-4 in basketball or 1-on-5 in basketball. So you need to temper this. And what Ian and I are going to talk about is the good examples and when you should, or how you prioritize. But just like everything else in life, there's not one specific thing you can say that's a kind of a panacea or a cure-all for all of these things. You have to use it in doses. Used properly in sports, it works. Used properly in business, it works. At a 5,000 person company, having a star or two is not as evident as if you work at a 50 person company and you have a star or two, because it can start to send the wrong messaging. So those are the little things you have to worry about. And you also have to think about, like, where do you put priority? When you're a small business, we did our Star Wars episode and we talked about Boba Fett. And I picked Boba Fett because he was a mercenary, but he's the best at what he does. And when you're a small business, you got to survive. So in some ways, it makes sense to prioritize the star. But at the same time, you have to start looking at, is there a period? Is there like a fulcrum? Are we prioritizing the star too much, where you lose the balance of the team? And that's something that, as a manager or an owner, you have to think about. You have to think about it hard.
I think the different sports are great that we're talking about it, because basketball, one person by far has such a big impact.
Right.
But if you take like one person on a football team, unless it's the quarterback, if they, do you take the Antonio Brown, right? He was a star, got too big for himself. They lost him. You lose a receiver, you can pretty much move on without a receiver. Most positions you can move on without. And I think that's the same when you talk about a startup versus a big company. There are times in a startup's life where a star engineer, a star marketer are the lifeblood of your organization. You literally don't run without them. And so you have to concede a lot of things, because really what we're talking about here, Frank, is a star who can deliver a lot has leverage over the organization. They have leverage because they know, you see this a lot with salespeople. They get this God complex of, well, if I left, I'm 40% of the book here. I'll take my book with me. And what are you going to do? And they start to act like that a little bit. And that's, to me, that's about as dangerous a place as you can be in as a business, when someone starts to act that way, where they start to remind you that they are everything. That's when you're not doing a great job of running a business, because you need to be finding better people that can come in and diversify away from one person holding you accountable.
Correct. Agreed. And they have leverage over you in a way that isn't right, that isn't fair. And it's a perilous position to be in as an owner, because it's almost powerless. Like, you have these people that So I live in Richmond, Virginia. For those of you that don't have a map or a globe, we used to be the center of the Confederacy. And since this convent, most of the statues are down, the monuments are down. Like, it's now just basically a bunch of pedestals or open platforms. But I went to coffee or lunch with some guy, a business owner in town, and he said something to me that I thought was fascinating. And this is before all the statues got ripped down, so this was just his opinion. He said, "I think the solution here is chemistry." And I said, "What does that mean?" He goes, "Chemistry." I was like, "Okay. I got a C in chemistry. Maybe you need to give me a little bit more here." He goes, We need to dilute the problem through chemistry. We keep the statues, but we put more statues up. And if there's 300 statues on Monument Avenue, the 6 that were here for 150 years that may symbolize something different lose their importance. And I think that was a fascinating takeaway for me, because that's what I look at with business. If you have a star, you've prioritized somebody. If you use chemistry and you can dilute it, if your star is one of many, there's a backup plan, there's people underneath that person, there's a succession plan in place. That's when it changes. That's when you become, instead of being captive to someone, you become in a position of strength as a business leader or a business owner, because you have what's called a bench. So one person defecting means less to you. When I had 50 employees is different than 5,000. But when I have a star employee leave, when I have 50, as long as it doesn't turn into 5 or 10, as long as I don't have an exodus, I'm in way better shape today than I would have been in when I had 5 employees and someone left. 5 employees, someone leaves, 20% of my workforce just left, and there's most likely not a training plan or an ascension plan. 15 employees, same. 25 employees, you're starting to get the scale. 50 employees, okay, 1 out of 50. What is that, 2%? Now, it could be someone that's a high-powered person, and they're probably harder to replace with just 1. But then when you have 50, do you have enough room to kind of promote from within and get these people to step up and lead from a different perspective?
So if you're trying to answer the question of do I treat a star differently, I think the answer is the same as every question you ask as a business owner or a manager, which is yes, as long as it's still accretive to your business. As long as it's additive to treat the star different, if keeping that star, if you need to do that to keep that star, and that star can handle it well. These are 2 important pieces. One, you should try to keep stars by all means necessary, with the caveat, as long as they can handle it. Now, when they start, and we'll get into this a little bit, when it starts to go to their head and they start to become a different performer, when they start to make their teammates feel a little bit different, now it starts to become dilutive to your team, because one person being happy and 49 being miserable, not real good for business. So at that point, you need to look at it and say, I probably need to start treating the star a little bit differently than I am, which is the same as everyone else, because they've let this go to their head and it is starting to hurt my entire team. So I think it's the question always you ask is, you and I talk about this almost every question we ask. You do it as long as it serves you. As long as it serves you. And when it stops serving you, you stop doing it. There is no rule that you have to treat a star differently. But it all comes down to who has the leverage. And as long as it's still in your advantage as a company, it's still helping you and they can handle it well, and the team is accepting of that. I used the Mike Allstott example because no one on the team bitched that he had a red jersey on. No one. That entire team thought he was one of the hardest workers. He was a great teammate. He was a captain. And then they knew he wasn't afraid of getting hit. And they also knew we're going to lose without him. Like, we will lose every game without him. He's our ticket. So don't hit him in practice. It didn't ruin the chemistry of the team that he had different rules. It was actually fine. And Mike handled it well. From everyone I talked to, he was an amazing teammate. Never made you feel like I'm an All-American and I'm going to be a pro. Never did that. He handled it well. But if he would have handled it poorly, I bet the coach would have changed. But like, take the freaking jersey off. You're getting hit. You're an asshole. You're hurting the whole team.
So like on the opposite end of the spectrum, and again, these are people we know incredibly well from watching SportsCenter. We don't know them, but like on the opposite end of that spectrum is Allen Iverson. Allen Iverson got up and publicly. So Ian put this in the notes with the whole Ted Lasso thing. My wife knows nothing about sports. So if you've not seen Ted Lasso, there's this hysterical thing where he literally goes bar for bar through the entire presser, where now all Allen Iverson talks about is practice. What I'll go into deeper here, which I think is interesting with Allen Iverson, is he bitched about practice. When he was on the podium after games, the NBA changed its dress code because of Allen Iverson. He did not look like somebody who was promoting the game. He was in streetwear and all kinds of really bad, it was bad look. And the NBA is a multi-billion-dollar business. So he was the one who changed that. In addition to that, he was in trouble in college. In addition to that, he was in trouble in high school. I think he actually went to prison. So what you're looking at with this person here is someone who comes out and outwardly says this thing about practice, famously fought with his coach, the best player around, number 1 overall draft pick in the NBA. And the kid was smaller than Ian and me. Like, you got to be incredible to be in the NBA at like 6'1", 145 pounds soaking wet. So he was like like transcendent talent. But there's a track record of crap and manure that this person's been hauling around with them for years. So that's the kind of person who he famously headbutted with. Larry Brown was his coach for the majority of his career. And Larry Brown was a really stubborn guy. Larry Brown ended up leaving and winning championships in Detroit. And the thing of it is like, you have this star, but the star was too immature to handle it and had like, he's the opposite of all style.
Yeah. And I would also say Larry Brown didn't handle it well either. Nor did really the commissioner. I mean, that, you had someone who was bringing in a ton of money. He was the most popular basketball player in the league. He was the next, they called him the answer. The question was, who's the next Michael Jordan? He got the nickname the answer because it was like Allen Iverson's the answer. That's how he got it. And he was a must-see, a must-draw. So both sides really didn't handle the whole Allen Iverson thing well. The commissioner didn't handle the fact that the new kids coming in were a little bit different, and you can't keep making them wear a suit every day when they come in. It's very different now today on some of it. I think on both sides, because the one thing that never happened is Allen Iverson's teammates never came out and said he's a terrible teammate. Never, like, to a man, anyone ever played with Iverson said he was an amazing teammate. Now, was he a winning teammate? He probably shot too much for someone that couldn't shoot much, could have passed a little more. So he could have listened to Larry Brown and grown a little better from him. And Larry probably could have handled him a little bit different if the two of them were both talking today about the way that whole thing went down. But, I think it all comes down to what serves you and what doesn't. But it's, ways that you treat stars different. So Iverson's, we can go through some of that with him, but I think with all of them, the first one is obviously pay. If they're a star, there is a very high percentage chance that they're going to be a star for someone else, meaning they're in high demand. We talked about free agency in sports, but let's be real. Every employee in business is a free agent all the day. Every day they wake up, they are a free agent and they are on the market, and anyone can call them at any time and offer them a lot more money than you are paying them. And you can't do anything about it.
Especially right now. Like, I hire people, you're doing it with Keep, but like I do it every day here. Right. So like the market now is nuts. Like, it is absolutely an employee's market. And so, yes, I just want to say that like in different business cycles, it kind of changes on who is and who is not in control. In the down cycle, the employer is in control. But right now, with technology and where the market is, employees have a lot of power.
Where I think most industries get this wrong, and most, I would say, mature companies that have been around a long time, is they let HR get way too involved in pay. We pick on HR a lot on the show, and I think they earn every bit of it. But if I had $1 for every time some dope in HR told me that an offer I wanted to make would put them over the range, or I need to go give this person an increase because the market has dramatically changed and they are getting offers for $30,000, $40,000, $50,000, $60,000 more than we're paying them. Yeah, but that's over our range, and we're not going to be able to change the ranges until we're in the year. It's just asinine. It's you can't, working within a company, you can't say this is the range and that impacts the market. The market tells you what your damn range is, and your range should change day to day. But maybe you have a range. So if you got 20 people in that position, sure, the range is good to kind of keep you in line. It's a guide. But if you've got someone who's doing 2, 3, 4 times the production, they literally produce what 4 people hired off the street could do, and you're trying to keep them in the same range, it's insane. Yeah, I think that you have to understand. And if you're an employee listening to this and you think you're a star, it doesn't really matter how you talk, how you dress, how you communicate in office, what people think of you. are you producing at a range that is so incredibly high that it would be insanely difficult to replace you? If the answer is yes, you should be asking for more money, because the truth is a competitor would pay you for more money right now. So, this pay range thing, every time LeBron is a free agent, LeBron James a free agent, he gets offered the highest salary of all time. It's happened like 6 times, and every team he's gone to, it has paid off to give him that money. It has made sense to give him that money, because not only is he a good star, he's a good teammate. He takes care of his body. He does all the things right. He shows up. He's available. He plays the games. So it's worth it to pay him. And that, I think that's the number one way that stars get differentiated in a company, is you don't just pat them on the head more, you pay them more than everyone else. You put your money where it's worth, and you say, you are worth a lot to my company and my profit, and I want you to be paid higher than everyone else because of that. They got to be consistent. They got to produce consistently, not 1 year.
Not much to add to this. Pay is the scorecard for competitive people. And if someone is a star, they're absolutely going to be paying attention to pay and comp. And what you realize in the career of an athlete, your window is smaller. But it's no different from when you and I had some momentum in our careers. We realized we have some leverage here. When I got a huge increase, it's because I had a job offer from somebody else. And I told my boss, I'd be stupid not to take this. And they beat it. And he goes, if I beat this, will you stay? I'm like, I don't want to leave, but I have to. So those are part of the things that are part of this process. The other thing is this. So we're going to kind of toggle back and forth here, right? So like as an owner, you can't have all stars, because if you have all stars, nobody wants to do the grunt work, or, I don't know if you can even say this anymore, but you can't have all chiefs and no Indians. It used to be allowed to be said. So you need people who are
used to be allowed to be said.
No,
if any of our dozens of listeners are offended by this, we'll cut it out in editing.
It's kind of like the episode we got into with the small people toss.
Yes.
So, so the point is, you can't have everybody on star payment, star treatment. It's just, it isn't there. But when you're putting together a team, if you realize you have someone who gives you otherworldly performance, and that person does 2 or 3 or 4 jobs, or has the productivity of people that do 2 or 3 or 4, the pay range doesn't mean a damn thing, because that person's producing at multiples that are off the charts on the other side. So I don't have an HR department, thus the reason I spew these things about the way that I do. But in addition to that, you have to look at that and balance it, and realize talented people have choices, and you can take care of them and pay, and realize you're going to get something else in return.
I think that's well said. I think that's the number one way you can differentiate. I think schedule is another one in which you can treat a star a little bit different. So we'll stick with the athletes. I talked about Kawhi Leonard. Something important to him was he got more rest days on the road. There's some trips he did. Remember when Roger Clemens was on the Astros, the Hall of Fame pitcher, and he wouldn't even go on road trips with the team? That was kind of, if he wasn't pitching on a 3-day road trip, it was in his contract that he didn't get on the plane and fly. And Roger Clemens was like 40 when he was pitching for the Astros. And the truth is, it wasn't good for him, an old man, to go get on a plane, lose sleep in a hotel. If his next start was 4 days from now, is it better for him to get on that flight and be around the team, and his old legs would be more tired because he wasn't sleeping in his bed, getting his workouts, his training? Or is it better than it was his time to pitch, he'd shut down the opposition? And
it turns out he was on a shitload of steroids. But the point is, he did it. If you remember, he kind of held out, right? He pitched for the Yankees on this agreement. Then he held out again. He did it for the Yankees again. Then he did it for the Astros for 1 or 2 seasons. And then he did it again for the Yankees. So it was one of these things that was like, everyone thought it was absolutely nuts. And then people saw the results you could get out of a part-time player, and it changed. They ended up doing it again with Andy Pettit when he was with Houston. So like it was this back and forth type of a thing where they started to realize, oh, wow. So let me use a real life example.
But again, Frank, all those teams you just mentioned, so the Yankees teams he was on, the Astros team he was on, I think he did it in Toronto a little bit, because he was older and because that was part of his agreement, those teams didn't complain. And actually a couple of them won championships. They went to the World Series. It didn't up. So this comes back to if him doing that would have had 20 people saying, which tells me Clemens was probably a good teammate.
Right.
Because no one was complaining, no one was arguing, no one was saying he was rubbing in their face. No one complained because they got the rocket every 5 days. And when he got the ball, he took care of business. And the young guys were like, this is bullshit. I got to go on road trips and I'm not pitching. They were just like, well, he's a little bit older and he's kind of earned it. He's got like 7 Cy Young awards. So it didn't upset the team chemistry, which is what it keeps coming back to is it accretive or dilutive for Roger to have a different schedule than everyone else? And it turns out it was accretive to that team. It added to their performance.
So I'm going to pivot from the work world to from the sports world to the work world, right? Roger Clemens, these types of things are a bit dated. And if you look at it now, schedule. What is schedule in the world post coronavirus? Zoom, PTO, working from home, working remote. So I saw an interview with Mr. Wonderful. He's the guy from Shark Tank with the bald head who sits in the middle. And he was like, the world's different. He's had people come up to him in multiple of his companies that are insanely talented and say, look, I don't want to live in this cramped space anymore. I'm moving to Montana. I'll work for you, but I'm doing it from Montana. I'm not doing it from New York. And if you're a project manager walking job sites, impossible. Like you got to be walking job sites in the city where the homes are. But if you're in a different part of business, that's part of it. Like you as an employer need to realize I've got talent and you have to stretch your management style to allow smart people. I was on a phone call before we got onto this podcast today with a placement service, a headhunting service, right? And we're looking for some high level people. And one of the conversations that we had was, he's going to want some flexibility in his schedule. I'm like, no problem. I was like, just to be clear, for the first month or two, I'm going to need them in the office to understand, be in meetings, see people, do those things. But I would imagine a work schedule of 3 off, 1 or 2 on in the office would easily work for us as long as they understood the rhythms and who was in charge of what, and there was some synergy. And I don't want the person to think they're alone. I want them to feel like they're together. And the quote back was, that seems perfectly reasonable. But that's something that 2 or 3 years ago, we have been, screw you, get in the office. Where now, because you got highly talented people and technology has changed, you absolutely can embrace that.
So I ran a mortgage company, and this is before we had gone paperless. Today, there's not paper, but when we were running it, there were files that were this, 2 inches thick that you had to submit. So we had real paper on a file before someone could get approved, with an underwriter. And it would have all kinds of very confidential stuff. So it had social security number, bank statements, income, all that. And you had, people on your team that would process the loan. They would talk to the customer, collect documents, work with an underwriter to get the approval. And at the time, you couldn't work remote. You just couldn't do it because of all the files. You had to go where all the files were. A processor might have 100 files in their cabinet that they were working on any given time. But we had one of our most senior processors. She was just dynamite. And by the way, we paid her over the range. She was amazing person. I loved her. And she had the best metrics in our company. Everything you measured her on, she was just dramatically better than anyone else doing the job. But she had 2 aging parents and she couldn't work in the office anymore. So she tried to put in a resignation. And we said, how about we try to make this work with you doing it from your house? And she was like, I don't know. I'm like, we'll get you a dedicated phone line. If you can get results, we won't care. Well, for like 6 months, she did it and nothing dropped. All of her performance stayed great. She would come into the office, get files from time to time, meet with her salesperson. She was phenomenal. And so for like 5 years, when no one else was allowed to work from home, she worked from home. And got results. And every once in a while, we'd have like a new processor who wasn't real good, but relatively new, kind of chirp and ask the question, why is she allowed to work from home and no one else gets that flexibility? I have kids and I got to get them to school. And it's like, the answer was always, it's real simple. Put up a few years with the exact results she has, and we'll give you the same latitude. But no one could ever touch her results. Like it was, frankly, it was like triple the production anyone else could do. And so we treated her different. We gave her a different schedule. And now I'm going to go back to this. She was the most humble person. Everyone knew her reasons for having to work from home. They weren't selfish. They were selfless reasons. She was the best teammate. She went out of her way to make people feel good. She made nobody feel like I'm special, I'm getting privileged, I'm entitled. People loved her. So no one even thought about complaining or outing her or demanding the same things. Again, by doing this, by giving her something different. And had I asked our corporate office in Reston, had I asked them if I could do that, they would have said no to me. So I just did it without telling anyone and made the decision. And it was smart. It was smart. I had a star. She needed a different schedule and I treated her different. And no one complained, and it was additive to the team.
When you left, were you in the top 10, 15 of employees, executives in the company, most likely, somewhere there?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Did you have competitors or peers who had a similar role to you when you made this decision about this woman?
Oh, yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So what also happens is Ian was a star. Ian made some decisions that had latitude, that if others were going to look at them, but they also said, Ian's running a division that's 4 times as big, or a region that's 4 times as big as anybody else. He's got the best results. He's using some non-traditional methods of managing. It's one of the reasons Ian became a star. And it's one of the reasons that when someone probably did find out about this, they probably found out about it from someone else before it made it to Ian. He got away with it because he made a good decision and he was also really good. And it's easy to back that stuff up. So it wasn't something that was derisive or was focused on from others. And they're like, look at Ian pulling this bullshit. He was getting incredible results and he made a smart decision that could be backed up. And he had support because he was also a high performer. So these things all kind of work together.
And I think, that's a big example of someone working in a different location, but letting a star skip out on certain meetings, certain training that is going to be redundant. I've had many managers where I've said, do I have to go to this? And really we're asking everyone else in the team, but they would say, no, you don't have to. Those are little things that were afforded to me, but those are also the same managers that knew they were asking me to work 60 hours a week. They knew I was killing myself to get great results. And an extra day would have meant I was working an extra day on the weekend. So they would say, you know what, I'll get you out of this one. I'll come up with a reason why you can't show up to this all day meeting in Pittsburgh or something that was important elsewhere. But yeah, I was producing good results. So I would be afforded the same kind of things. And that.
So go ahead. No, I was going to say, speaking of, the next thing we're talking about is autonomy. And speaking of autonomy, sometimes the quarterback's got to call audibles and speed things along. So I'm going to do that here. What we got to look at with audibles and veterans versus rookies, right? So they have this incredible thing on TV now where they have an entire broadcast where the Monday Night Crew is up there. But then they have these 2 ding-dongs, Peyton and Eli Manning, from their living rooms, and they're getting better ratings. And the reason they're getting better ratings is they're both Hall of Fame quarterbacks, and they both sit there and just kind of chew the fat and talk about the game. And you realize the reason they can do this in a way that is it's better. It's a better product than a fully produced Monday Night Football crew is because they both know what they're doing. They're both stars. They both had incredible autonomy, especially Peyton, and they could make lots and lots of audibles because of the way they understood the game and how they did things. And they were so incredibly good. Like Ian and I joked in prep on this, like Peyton called like an offense may play 75 plays. Peyton probably called 60 to 70 of them by himself because he was a star, he was prepped, he knew it, and he worked insanely hard.
Yeah, he could call inaudible. If you have a rookie quarterback and they have not delivered anything in the league and a coach calls a play, they're not allowed to just audible all the time. Whereas in a veteran who gets it right more often than they get it wrong, they can pretty much change the call whenever they want. And I think where you give people more autonomy is you give them, you might have, maybe you have 6, 7 managers working for you. I know I was like this. If I had a couple of region managers that were brand new, I just promoted them. I kind of wanted them checking with me a little more than I did my veterans, just for now. Like, if you're about to make a decision on A, B, C, or D, check with me. I'm going to let you pretty much do what you want to do, but at least kind of let me know what's going on. I need to be in the loop on how you make decisions. Whereas in someone who's been working with me for 7, 8 years, I'm not asking for them to ever check with me. And I think some of this isn't even just about stars. Autonomy is just about comfort level. And with a star, they're a star for a reason. They make a lot more good decisions than bad ones. So it might be pricing, it might be, I know myself as a rookie sales rep at GE, I had no autonomy to cut the price, none. If I was given a price and a proposal at a 25% gross margin and the customer said no, I had to come back to a whole nother meeting and sell them on why it should come down. That was my rookie year. 3 years later, after I was a top 10 rep, I didn't ask anyone. I kind of knew that meeting's a waste of time. They're going to let me come down to 22%. I'm going to negotiate right here, get the deal, and then go tell my boss I got the deal, but I had to come down 10,000. And I wouldn't catch any shit. If I'd have done that as a rookie, I'd have been threatened to be fired if I'd have done that. And it was because I had a track record as someone who didn't just give away the farm. I was a good rep. I did my job. And so I had autonomy to make decisions that people that weren't performing didn't have.
And good managers are going to see that and they're going to give it to you. They're going to give you what's called rope, leeway, some tolerance. And there's some famous examples in here, but I'll let you read the first one.
So Lawrence Taylor, largely thought to be the greatest defensive player in the history of football. He was
and a fan favorite of Bill Parcells, by the way. Parcells loved him.
Well, Parcells loved him because he was a star. Everything he did turned to gold, but he was an incredible athlete. He just changed games all the time. But Parcells, a little bit more of he's the head coach of the New York Giants. They've already won a Super Bowl by now. He's got a young, piss and vinegar, fiery defensive coordinator named Bill Belichick, who has gone on to have a nice career himself. And Belichick went to Parcells at one point, and this is after LT, Lawrence Taylor's already a star, and said, I got a real problem here. We're real strict about meetings here with the Giants. And, if you're not 5 minutes early, you're late. And he's like, Lawrence has been coming into my meetings, 10, 15 minutes late, and it's pretty consistent. And Parcells, he was expecting Parcells to give him some discipline that he should give to Taylor. And Parcells' answer was, why are you starting your meeting so early? And, the message there is, it's Lawrence Taylor. What are you going to do? Bench him? And Lawrence knew that. Like, what are you going to do? Are you going to bench me? And again, I never once heard of any report where people complained about Lawrence Taylor's staying out late, partying, showing up late to meetings, because on game day, he was a savage and you couldn't win without him. And so teammates were like, that's Lawrence. He's, that's what he does. And there's different rules for Lawrence Taylor because he does things that we can't do on the field and we're okay with it.
So quick aside, my uncle used to live in New York City and somehow he got into a cab, most likely right after Lawrence Taylor. And this was like in the heyday, like when he was like often suspended because of cocaine use and things like that. And he found Lawrence Taylor's pay stub. It was his pay, and there was a deduction or a docking for some kind of a suspension that he had. Like, it was just priceless.
That's beautiful. But you see this all the time with stars where they play by a little bit different set of rules. Michael, we've joked before, Michael Vick, it comes out that he's running a dogfighting ring. If Michael Vick would have been the third string linebacker, the 53rd guy in the lineup, that report would have come out with, and the Falcons released him today. But as it was, Atlanta took forever to release him, right? It was a long, drawn out process where they stood by him as long as they could before they realized it was untenable. And I think you tend to give more leeway, tolerance, to a real transcendent performer than other people until it starts to hurt them.
Yep. So two things here. One, there's a 30 for 30 on Randy Moss. It's called Rand University, and he grew up in a small part of West Virginia. Same thing as Michael Vick. He got into so many problems, but he was forgiven because, he was recruited to go to Notre Dame. Then he went to Florida State. Then he got kicked off of there. He ended up somewhere else. And then he was a problem, and he got drafted 18th overall in the NFL draft instead of probably first, second, or third, where he would have gone if he wasn't a problem. But in that whole 30 for 30, what they talk about is this guy who was basically his best friend was equally as much of a screw up, but was not quite as good of an athlete. He was like a AA baseball player. He wasn't a, Hall of Famer in several sports. And because of it, his career got derailed at 19, and he's back in West Virginia. That's kind of the same story with Vic, right? Vic was so good. As soon as he was out of prison, there was a group of teams lining up to sign him because he was transcendent. Now, I am not nearly as fast. I can't throw the ball as far, but I've always been a hard worker. And I remember one day I went to the gym in the middle of the workday, and I'm walking out. And as I'm walking out, I bump into my boss's wife. My boss had a reputation of being a bit of a hard ass. So I'm like, shit. Like I shouldn't have been at the gym, whatever. So I kind of owned it. And I went up and saw him like 4 hours later. I'm like, I'm sure you've heard. He goes, before I could even finish the story, because Frank, last thing I'm worried about with you is you putting in your hours. When you get your gym time in is the least of my concerns. And he kept walking. And that was a hard ass who I was kind of afraid of. And I thought I was going to get screamed at, but I'd earned it. And awesome. Yeah, I was like, I had a whole different level of respect for that guy right after that interaction, because he just let me do my thing. And it was one of the few times where I kind of felt like, pretty cool.
There's kind of a classic line in business, which is ask for forgiveness, not for permission.
Right.
And it's a very dangerous piece of advice if you're not a star. If you're not a great performer and you're not confident in yourself, you probably should toe the line as long as you can. But stars tend to do that more often. I'm sure you were like that. I was definitely like that, where I'd be like, I'm going to get in trouble for this, but it's going to work. And that second piece I said is really important. If you're going to ask for forgiveness and you just know you're going to get yelled at, it better work. You better be confident in your ability that when you go out, break rank, and you go outside of the lines a little bit, you better be confident in yourself that your decisions are going to work and it's going to make sense, because stars can kind of get away with that. I feel like I got away with it a lot in my career of just saying, hey, sorry, here's what I did. Probably should have checked with you. And the bitch at you a little bit, and then you move on and nothing's going to happen so long as you keep producing. Now, if you're not a producer and you're doing that shit, that's terrible advice to someone who's not a producer, to ask for forgiveness, not permission.
And there's another thing that's worth talking about within this subject, right? So let's just say there's a management change. You were the star, new people come in. You've got to realize I probably can't pull some of the same crap I pulled before. You got to pull back a little bit, and you got to realize you have to self-regulate. You also can't.
Well, you have to demonstrate to the new leadership team that you are a star. That
you got to re-earn your star credentials before you go back.
Got taken. No one cares about the past.
That's it.
What have you done for this manager? Like,
that's
not the last manager. What'd you do for this one?
So that happens a lot. You'll get promoted. You'll either get into a new job or you'll get to another group of managers, and you've got to re-earn. You can't just show up on day one and start doing that stuff. You got to earn it first. So those are the little things that you kind of realize. And like in my life, in my career, I felt like I was a star in multiple places, but I moved businesses, I moved divisions, I moved departments, and you always better start off as that humble person who isn't a star. Because I was never Emmett Smith. Like when Emmett Smith changed teams, he was already Emmett Smith. I was just some dipshit that was in a new role. So you got to re-earn that. What happens is your reputation follows you, and you can maybe spend a little bit less time in the humble spot before you can get into flourishing. But those are the things that you must reestablish.
So the fifth thing that you can give a star, that is not pay, is influence. Tom Brady now with the Tampa Bay Bucks, and the one thing he complained the most about with the Patriots is in 18 years with the Patriots, he got like one game ball and he had no input. And his quote was, "They still treat me like a 22-year-old rookie." And I think I've earned, with 6 Super Bowls, I think I've earned the right to have some ideas about how our offense should be run and how we should staff. And the Bucs have done a great job with this. He said, "I want to go get Antonio Brown." That's a pretty risky move for a company to do. Antonio Brown had already kind of flamed out spectacularly at 3 or 4 different other organizations. And the Bucs were like, "All right, Tom, we trust your judgment. You can handle it." He said, "Give me Gronk." They were like, "Okay, we'll go sign him." So he has influence that he didn't feel he had over the type of people that were brought into the organization. And another football analogy on this is John Harbaugh was the coach of the Baltimore Ravens, and he had a leadership council, and the leaders that he had on them were pretty good. It was Ed Reed, it was Terrell Suggs, it was Ray Lewis. These are Hall of Fame defensive players, and he would meet with them once a week, and he would say, "Here's what I'm thinking of doing. Here's some decisions that I'm struggling with," and he would give them input into things he was going to do with the team, whether cut a player, pick a player up. And one thing I found really interesting in this is the 3 of them couldn't always agree with each other. All 3 would have a different idea, and they would start arguing with each other. And he would smile a little bit and be like, "Look, my job's not as easy as it sounds, is it?" And that made his biggest leaders, his most vocal leaders on the team, feel invested in the decisions and the direction and the strategy of the team. And he was not affording that to the backup right guard. He was affording that to his absolute stars, the guys that produced the most on Sundays, and it kept them more engaged than they would have been if he was just telling them what to do all the time.
Right. And with stars, if you give them autonomy, give them influence, you keep them engaged, makes them credible, and they continue. It's like a snowball. It continues to gain momentum, and properly harnessed, Mike Allstott is most likely this. Properly harnessed, it's good for the team, good for the organization, good for all of it. Like my guess is Michael Vick dogfighting wasn't something that went viral within the Atlanta Falcons, because a bunch of guys are like, it's not going to have a happy ending for most of us.
I think that's right. And I think the last thing you can give a star is just access, more access to you, right? That's, people want to be around the leadership team. We talked about this in movies. Leonardo DiCaprio is spending a lot more time with Tarantino when they're making a movie than someone who is an extra on the movie getting input. So Leonardo, by being around the leadership, he gets access, he gets influence, he gets input. And I think that's the same in business. I think if you got a star, you're inviting them to more meetings, you're asking them to come chew on things, they're spending more time with you. And that stars value that, feeling important, feeling like I might not be the owner, I might not be the last decision maker, but damn, I have a lot of influence on it.
Very, very, very important. And there's something else to it too. Someone like Leonardo DiCaprio, he's made a bunch of movies with Tarantino, but he's made a bunch of movies with Scorsese. He's made a bunch of movies with James Cameron. Like, he's done multiple things with different incredible directors. And what you start to realize is those guys are getting feedback from it. So you get that access. Like, Leonardo earns the access, but the director is getting something from him, but Leonardo's learning something from them too. So there's like this trade-off. And what happens if you're a star and you properly handle the stardom, your star treatment makes you better. You forget that you think you're like the stars who lose sight of this is what we're going to get into in a second. The stars who lose sight of this lose the access. And once you lose the access, you start losing some of your edge and some of the information and some of the things that you had that did in fact not necessarily made you special, but kept you special, because the access is a big part of that.
So I played high school baseball with a guy named JJ Putz, and he was insanely good. He was 6'4", 6'5" in high school, through in the mid 90s. He had a 0.3 ERA his junior year. 0.3. He was an All-American starter.
So a 0.3 for those of you that don't know baseball, basically someone would score a run every third game.
He gave up like 3 or 4 earned runs the whole year. And I'm not even sure those were real. He had multiple no-hitters. I was his catcher. It was just fun. He was insane, but it was one of those guys that you just knew in high school, this guy's going to be a major leaguer. He's so different. He's so much better than everyone else. It's unreal. His athleticism, his arm, his talent. But anyway, this team, our coach absolutely treated him like a star. So, he was the only guy who was allowed to call off pitches. He didn't ask for it, but he would, he kind of got some of these things. He didn't play. He was the only kid that didn't play on our mandatory varsity travel team. Jay didn't play on it. He went and played on his own travel team, which was a lot better than our travel team. And it made him better, but Jay didn't do it. But this guy's rule was always, you either play on my travel team, you don't play on varsity. Well, Jay came along and was like, I play on my own travel team. Thanks. Still was on the varsity team. Of course, he was smart enough to do that. But what I'll say about this is Jay got a lot of the rope, the leeway, the tolerance. He had a lot more access to the coach, that kind of things. But at the end of practice, when we did extra running, Jay was there. When it was a hot day, I was his catcher. Jay showed up with 2 Gatorades, 1 for me. He was just one of those guys that didn't want to be seen. He knew he was different. He knew he was special. He didn't act that way. And so it didn't tear our team apart. He knew how to humbly take it. And our coach was good. Like when he'd make a sprint, Jay was run. So he would put him somewhere in there, but it was fun for me to kind of watch someone handle being a star, getting that treatment and it not tearing the team apart.
One of the amazing things about this story is Ian wasn't a star. And he never once brought Jay a Gatorade.
Never once. I mean, I was probably acting like a star, even though I wasn't really good. I was already learning how to act like a star back then.
So there's 2 stories here that I'll tell quickly. We had a kid that played basically varsity football with us for 4 years. He came in as an 8th grader, started as a 9th grader, like right away, like literally just graduated middle school and he's on the varsity team. Kid's name was Dusty Wang. He still holds every record in Marjorie Stoneman Douglas, like for rushing, attempts, everything. And one of our friends from that team, Grushka, still goes to the events and he's like, all right, you were on this team. Is Dusty Wang a joke or did that guy really exist? Like nobody can believe the guy's name was Dusty Wang. But Dusty Wang was a good high school player and his athletics took him as far as he could get. And that was it. It ran out. But during the same stretch of time, we had another guy who played with us. His name was Mike Caruso. And Mike Caruso was 2 years younger than me, same age as my brother. But growing up, he was the best baseball player around. And he was the best baseball player as a freshman. And he was good enough in high school that he got drafted like 40th overall. And he was in the majors by the time he was 20. But the problem with Caruso that was very different from the story Ian told you with JJ Putz is that JJ built a work ethic and had alternatives. And Caruso didn't. So what Caruso did is he was just really good, but he never really built the work ethic. And he was on the cover of Sports Illustrated with all the best shortstops of the era, Hall of Famers, Edgar Renteria. Like if you're not a baseball guy, A-Rod, Derek Jeter, you've heard of these people, right? He's on the cover of Sports Illustrated with those guys about who's next. And he was gone in 2 years. He played less than 3 full seasons in the majors, incredibly talented because he didn't do what JJ did, which was put in the work. So what we're going to pivot to with this
JJ played in the pros for 15 years.
Right. What you pivot to is this: star treatment properly enhanced or embraced by the star can turn into perennial good things, long-term careers, but not properly, but it could also go wrong.
Can go wrong. So, the things I think where you can screw it up as a manager is one, when you treating someone different in the office is one thing, but sometimes you start to get too close with a star outside of the office. But giving them access, giving them, being inclusive, you start hanging out with them on weekends, because you're trying to go out of your way. My first boss lived in town. He was a single guy, lived in Chicago. I was a great performer for him. And then we started to become friends, and we became such good friends that I think I became a bit of a pain in the ass of an employee. I was difficult with him because I was close with him. I saw him on the weekends, went out drinking, went on Las Vegas trips. And if something was going on that I didn't like, I was just obstinate with him. It was a pain in the ass. Now, it never got to the point where it hurt the team too much, but I always looked back on that and thought, I got to be careful getting too close with any star because I became difficult to manage. And I was always cognizant of that, of not palling around too much with people that worked for me outside of the office, no matter how much of a star they were, because I was afraid they would take advantage of me the way I took advantage of a very good boss who gave me a lot of, good leeway.
So I'm going to kind of lump two together here, and I'm going to talk about two different things that are bad from stars. One of which is you start to treat teammates poorly. We've talked about Emmitt Smith. We talked about Allen Iverson. To our knowledge, great teammates. But once you start to treat people poorly, Mike Allstott got away with this because he treated everyone great and he was a great teammate. But once you start to think you're bigger than the group, there comes this moment where the group is actually more powerful than the star. And the star can not only lose the star treatment, star could lose it all. And as a business owner, from time to time, you have to look at that and be like, I got to let this person needs to go. They have to go. And in my history, I've had 3 or so people that all fit this bill. Like they thought different reasons, different circumstances, but every instance, there was something there. It's just like, we've got to go on without them. And it's never comfortable to go through. You never want to say goodbye to the star, but sometimes you have to. And then part of the star treatment or start of the performance that you start to see with stars is they use the word my and I a lot. I do not say my or I, and my last name is on the door of this company. I don't. I say ours. I say we. The only time I say my or I is when something gets screwed up. And most of the time I didn't screw it up. I know who did. I take ownership of that because I'm not selfish. And then we have a conversation privately. But the my and I guy, I remember when I was a kid working at Outback, I was in college, and this guy came in. He was a good dude. I ended up becoming friends with him, but he's always like, this is my knife. This is my store. Everything was my. And I was just like, you're not the manager. The last guy was, because he never did that. He made it feel like it was mine. And I had more buy-in because of that. And this guy would come in and just like bark, and everyone's like kind of tune the guy out because it wasn't his and we knew it.
I think the time, we talked about all the things that you should give a star, but the time to stop giving them all of those things is when it becomes clear that it's this never ending vortex that they want more. They need everyone to know they're the star. They need everyone to give them all the credit. You can't give their teammates credit without them jumping in and cutting them off, saying, no, I did that. That when you get to that level, people resent them. And what happens is you get this big drop in productivity from the rest of the team because the star is making everyone feel lousy. And then they start to resent you as the manager, that you're not curbing that ego. You're not reining it in. You're just feeding it by giving them all these extra advantages. And sometimes you got to cut a star off at the knees. You need to maybe publicly humble them in a meeting. If they lip off to you, if they say something, you need to humble them in front of everyone else to remind everyone, hey, I'm still in charge here and we'll live without you. Because the truth is, no company, unless you're a weak company, no strong company dies because the star leaves. Like at some point, if the star pushes you so much, yeah, you're producing a lot, great. But you know what'll happen? You'll be gone and I'll go find another star. At some point, someone will rise up and become my next star. And so, you have to be really careful in paying attention to if your behaviors as a leader and how you're managing this person are going to their head so much that they can't handle it. They can't humble themselves and say, man, I am really appreciative of someone like Frank Cava giving me all these extra perks. And I'm going to make sure that I make the rest of the team feel like they're the most important people because I'm already given enough.
There was something that when I was in high school, and I thought this was really cool. It didn't happen at my high school, it happened at another one. But they had a game they called the Has-Been Will-Bees. The Has-Beens are the kids that were graduating. The Will-Bees were the young kids. And the young kids almost always won. And the young kids always won because they were hungry and they wanted it. And what you need to realize if you're a star, in the NBA, you get old. Tiger Woods does not have the back or the legs that he used to have. And it's harder to win because there's a bunch of young kids. That same thing happens. as a business owner, I got to make sure I keep my fastball because someone else could leave and become a competition. But inside of an organization, you need to realize if you let it start getting to your head, someone else is going to charge because you weren't always the star. Even experts were beginners once. And then what you start to realize is you got to put a whole team together. It's not just a person. And there is star treatment, but at the same time, the team and those things kind of work together. The last thing I'll say, Ian, is this, and I'll let you close it. The New York Giants were a very, very, very good team for years. And the year the Patriots won 17-0 was the year after Tiki Barber retired. And Tiki Barber is a Hall of Fame caliber player. I don't think he's in yet, but he's on the cusp, right? And the saying was, there's addition through subtraction. Tiki Barber wasn't on the team the next year. They weren't as good at running back, but he was not known as a great teammate. And that team rallied together and they won. And that happens in sports, in life, and in business.
The example I'll leave with is, at their peaks, LeBron James and Carmelo Anthony were paid the exact same. They had similar contracts. One went to New York, the other one went to Miami around the same time. And both of them had immense talent. Both of them had all of the perks that we talked about today from their organization. The difference is LeBron played the game in a way that made everyone better. He was a good passer. He got everyone involved. He brought people up. He was all about winning. Carmelo was all about scoring. He was all about individual accolades. He was all about making the all-star team and how many points per game he could lead. And he didn't make his teammates better. And so one organization gave all the perks to one star, and the same perks went from another organization. But at the end of the day, the Knicks looked silly for doing it because they didn't get what they wanted out of it. Carmelo got everything he wanted out of it. But the whole idea of giving all of these is to win more. Like if you're treating someone much different, the expectation needs to be that the whole team is better because of it. So you do treat someone a lot different if they get you more wins, if they make you more profitable, if they help you grow. But if they make the team worse, what are you doing it for? And the organizations that gave LeBron everything looked smart. The Knicks looked silly for what they did. And it was the same level of talent. It was just the wrong result that they got of it. So, I hope that over this hour, I've convinced you that I deserve a raise for carrying this podcast. I feel like you should start treating me for the kind of person that I am. But 80% of our production comes from me. We're like 80-50 because I'm 50% of the people, but I do 80% of the production.
So what I would like to point out is you have acted like a star. You've complained about pay. You haven't paid attention to my schedule. You've had an autonomy because you haven't followed the outline. I have to give you rope because if you don't, I'll be doing this alone.
Hey man, good luck at your 1:45 meeting that you're 10 minutes late for.
My 1:30 meeting. Good to see you, bro.
See you, man.